This video is brought to you by Keeps. Stick around to hear more about the discount they are providing to the entire upper echelon community. Okay, it's been like a month, maybe month and a half, give or take, since I initially covered Quantic Lab, but since then, the reality of what actually happened within that company has really only gotten worse. For those that don't know, super lightning fast recap. I got contacted by a whistleblower, and they gave me documents. They had insider knowledge about Quantic Lab, who works as a QA testing company. They say that Quantic Lab lied about the relative experience of testers that they had working on Cyberpunk 2077 and overwhelmed the developers with unimportant bugs under an arbitrary quota. The gist of it is that Quantic Lab helped contribute to a wider landscape of production difficulties for that game, which ultimately led to a historically botched release of a mega-hyped video game. They were not solely responsible, however, a lack of experience and general mismanagement at the company led to significant issues in what could have otherwise been a far more streamlined process. Not the only issue with development by any stretch, but an issue nonetheless. Here's the thing though, I had this feeling. My source had outlined some serious problems with workflow when it came to Cyberpunk, but there was an added layer in play where they alleged that Quantic Lab would lie about team size and effectively bill clients for non-existent work hours. That's fraud. Stone cold fraud. And after my initial coverage, things began to rapidly accelerate. Alright, before going further, today's video has a sponsor, and that sponsor is Keeps. Now, the reason for this is demographics. Most people who watch the content on this channel are men, and most of you are between the ages of 18 and 45. That's also a prime demographic for hair loss, which affects 2 out of 3 men by their mid-30s, and thus Keeps was a logical sponsor to have. Keeps is a hair loss prevention treatment with more 5-star reviews than any of its competitors. You can order and get treated directly from your own home for a fraction of the cost when compared to other products, and they offer generic versions of the only 2 FDA-approved hair loss treatments on the entire market. If you click the link down below, you can get 50% off your first order. Again, that's 50% off your first order if you click the link down below in the description. Keeps can help prevent, even reverse the process of hair loss in some cases, and I would like to thank them for being a long-standing partner of the channel, making it possible for me to have a degree of income security in a world and an industry where that security is often extremely rare or difficult to come by. Once again, there's a link down below in the description for 50% off your first order. Big thank you to Keeps for sponsoring the channel. The first video I posted on this made it into international gaming news. Some outlets were skeptical, some reached out to me for further information, some of them got basic facts of the case wrong and proceeded to warp the narrative completely by misquoting everyone, but gaming media is what it is, so yeah. Focusing in on the angle of Cyberpunk, the story quickly polarized. Some people seem to be using this new revelation about the QA process as an exoneration of CD Projekt Red. Others were quite angry about that possibility and pushed back hard on whether or not the role of QA had any impact at all. People are entirely too invested, emotionally speaking, in the history and prospect of this video game, so it's understandable, but something began to happen behind the scenes that went largely unnoticed. The Cyberpunk angle got covered by a lot of outlets. I think Forbes wrote about it twice, both times focusing only on the Cyberpunk angle. GamesIndustry.biz, I think Kotaku was in there, NME, The Gamer. Just Google Quantic Lab Cyberpunk and you'll find dozens and dozens more. Beyond that, once the company itself responded, everyone covered that part. Company denies doing bad thing, echoed all across the gaming news sector as headlines, but once that first video came out, I started to get contacted by dozens of current and former employees, probably 30 to 40 in total, who began to paint an even darker picture. Now, for some of that, most of it actually, people just kind of had to take my word for it, and I know that's a really hard thing to do. Quantic Lab has an extremely strict NDA. A lot of my sources were not exactly willing to go on record and use their own names, and so I could talk about various issues, but I was just a YouTuber. Plenty of people disagree with me on prior opinions, plenty of people have no interest in trusting anonymous sources, and as a result, after the initial explosion of Cyberpunk coverage, not that many people felt like engaging anymore. However, a lot of these outlets are American, and thus they have more interest in covering the new version of OnlyFans that Amaranth is apparently making other than actual news, so expecting anything else is entirely my own fault. But behind the scenes, for over a month, the story has been playing out in Romanian media with a very different tune. I didn't actually know this at the time, but Cluj, where Quantic Lab is located, is sometimes referred to as the Silicon Valley of Romania, and Quantic Lab themselves is a pretty significant presence there. There were major national networks getting involved with the story, and though it doesn't seem like there is a governmental investigation at this point in time, and both Quantic Lab and its parent company Embracer Group are completely silent on the matter, an article from Libertatia has just come out which corroborates and expands on many things that I previously covered. Quick rundown, here's a list of the issues that were discussed by my own sources, as well as additional sources on the Hacking Work podcast. Quantic Lab employees were allegedly heavily mistreated and sometimes not paid properly. Whether it be overtime, asking for money back after a paycheck, or late pay, the issues were numerous. It is claimed that Quantic Lab would misrepresent team size and relative experience. Pay them for 10 testers with 1 or more years experience each. You maybe got 2 people, or 1 person, and a team leader who had barely a year's experience between them. Localization? Allegedly, the company would lie about the number of native language speakers that they had on staff. Workers were using Google Translate just to understand how to play the game at times. The CEO? It was claimed by one source that he personally enriched himself by tasking the entire company's mobile testing department to work on his own private UTest account. Basically, just having the company make him a bunch of personal money, which is definitely not okay. Romanian labor law? Who cares about that one? Allegedly, the company would force or coerce younger employees into resigning so that they could cycle through lower paying positions, leading to a perpetual downturn in experience and actual quality. I could go on, I really could, but one claim in particular is what matters, and I'll pick up the pace here, because Libertatia has come out with their own extensive testimony, and this one is where we get into the realm of multi-million-dollar fraud. Quote, several employees told how the company charges clients invoices with non-existent man-hours, thus collecting money for work that did not take place. End quote. That's precisely what my own sources said, though they did specify that this was not in relation to Cyberpunk 2077, which was given special consideration by the company. They fully staffed that project, they just did it with brand new hires and inexperienced testers. However, for other projects, not so lucky. On their portfolio page, we can see a number of games that have been worked on by Quantic, but we should also remember that this isn't everything. There are games that they have worked on where the contract prevents them from discussing it publicly. They have done testing for a lot of companies, and not all of the games end up in their actual website portfolio, so when I discuss the impact of all this, keep in mind that it isn't just relegated or isolated to this one particular list of games. Also, they don't just work on video games. They do consulting, hardware compatibility testing for applications, all sorts of things. And this wider range of services should also be considered when we read further quotes from Libertatia with their testimony. Quote, I've always been passionate about video games, so I said I'd give it a try. The hiring process was pretty quick. I had no professional experience at all when they hired me, but this is the case for 95, maybe even 98% of the people who enter Quantic, end quote. This obviously corroborates the inexperience angle, but more importantly, later on, quote, I had to lie in those documents many times about the number of employees working on a project. For example, I wrote that 5 people were working when, in fact, only 2 were working. There were also cases where only 1 man worked. And I'm not talking about tens of projects, but hundreds of projects, end quote. So that's fraud, obviously. Telling a client you have 5 people working and then just 1 or 2 are actually logging hours means you collect 2 to 5 times as much money as you should for a service you are straight up lying about. The source goes on, quote, in the reports sent to the clients, there was a certain number of hours that had to be fulfilled, and although the actual number was 8 lead tester hours and 0 tester hours, I put in 8 hours of lead tester and 40 hours of tester for 5 people, so 40 stolen hours, and the tester hour was generally paid from 10 euros upwards, so it was thousands of euros per month. End quote. Hundreds of projects at thousands of euros per month each, and some of them were far bigger than just 5 people on the team. Obviously, not all of them are synchronized, or not all of them equal in the relative degree of fraud there, but over the span of a few years, that's millions of euros being stolen from companies for work that was not done, and the downstream ramifications are that the products that they tested aren't properly tested. The sources go on to specifically corroborate what was said in my initial video, claiming, quote, most of the people who worked there had no or very little experience. At Cyberpunk, there were many inexperienced testers, although the client had been promised that only people who had been active in the field for at least a year and a half would work on the game. I think there were only 6 or 7 people who met that condition, end quote. This one matters because it underscores the fact that Quantic Lab lied to CD Projekt Red. Obviously, again, this isn't the only reason for the game's troubled development, but when you hire a company and they just completely lie to you about capabilities and experience, and then produce inferior results after the fact, not the fault of the actual workers, mind you, they did the best they could under the conditions they were in, but when that happens, it will have a negative impact. It is wasted resources, time, and manpower on both sides of the equation and relationship because the corporate side of Quantic was allegedly just not being honest, lying to, and committing fraud against a bunch of their clients. The rest of the article maintains and reinforces the idea that Quantic Lab is a meat grinder of inexperienced workers being taken advantage of. Hire kids that don't know any better, take advantage of them, get rid of them after a period of time to find someone new and keep the cycle going, because intimidation tactics work very, very well when a worker doesn't even know how to defend themselves, or has not yet learned what rights they actually possess. Telling clients that you have 2, 3, even 5 times as many workers testing their product than you actually do, and collecting payment based on that number and the billable hours created by those fictional people, that's hardcore fraud. I am actually baffled at the idea that there isn't a governmental investigation into them right now, and I would ask that Embracer Group make some sort of formal statement on this. My own source has a lot more to say. We were waiting a bit to see how things shook out, but they were hoping that some kind of top-down audit might fix these issues. As it stands now, though, with nothing apparently happening, well, I'm just going to quote one of the emails that they sent to me. All right, here we go. I really did want to let Embracer handle this themselves internally, since it was the only way for changes to be made without having Quantic be opened to legal action from CDPR, but if they won't do anything, then so be it. End quote. I don't know what that means, okay? That was them speaking, not me. That's what they sent to me. They tend to play things pretty close to the chest, but I know that they have plenty more documents in their possession, okay? They definitely have a fair bit of knowledge that I don't even know about as of right now. And since their goal is spurring change at the company, I doubt that this will be bottlenecked to just my channel for much longer if the official policy remains of say nothing, do nothing. It's big enough now where they could probably approach any outlet and be taken seriously. For the moment, my takeaway is this. Romanian media has sourced further corroboration of widespread fraud at Quantic Lab that manufactures billing hours and lies about team size. This has been used for, quote, hundreds of claimed projects, which would easily translate to millions of dollars in fraud over the span of years. More and more people are still coming forward with this, or about this, and for as long as it has persisted, as well as whatever time remaining where it continues, that kind of business practice can dramatically impact any project that they work on. The result? Outsourced QA that is delivering horribly bad comparative results as it manipulates and steals from clients, making whatever project it engages with either marginally or severely worse compared to its actual potential and budget. And right now, it seems the powers that be aren't really striving to find a solution. Let's hope they start. Not just for the sake of workers, but for the sake of the games and other projects that this company has a hand in. That's it. I've had a few more interviews since the initial burst of coverage. I knew about a couple more articles that seem to be well-sourced, potentially coming soon, but perhaps a few of those have stalled out. I'm not sure. Either way, this is an ongoing story that I've consistently kept up with and will continue to do so because change should be possible for this. It should be an option to spur some kind of response and make things better. It should not be a thing that the whole topic just dies and the company continues to allegedly commit fraud on a massive scale. Maybe it is a thing, but it definitely shouldn't be. If you want to support the channel, check out the links down below. Locals, Patreon, Odyssey, merch, Keeps, plus a few more things like social media, etc., etc. Another YouTuber to check out as well. But I'll cut it there and stop rambling. As always, thank you all for watching, and have a nice night.